There's a moment, and Diana described it herself, when everything she believed about her marriage collapsed. Not gradually, not over months. In one moment, one discovery, one piece of evidence that proved Charles had never stopped seeing Camilla Parker-Bowles. It wasn't the phone tapes, it wasn't a tabloid story. It was something she found, something small enough to fit in a jewelry box, specific enough to name, and devastating enough that she could still describe it in precise detail a full decade later, alone in a room, speaking into a tape recorder. This is the story of that object. Everyone thinks they know the Diana story. The fairy tale, the unravelling, the tapes, the headlines, the interviews. They know the ending, but almost no one knows the beginning. Not the engagement, not the wedding. The beginning of the truth. The specific physical, holdable-in-your-hand moment when Diana Spencer discovered that her entire marriage was built on a lie. She described it on tape. She named the room. She named the person whose desk it was on. She described the object. She identified what was engraved on it. And she used one word to describe what it did to her. Devastated. To understand what Diana found, you need to understand a language she wasn't supposed to know existed. Charles and Camilla had pet names for each other. He was Fred, she was Glattis. Borrowed from The Goon Show, that anarchic BBC radio comedy Charles had adored since boyhood. These weren't throwaway nicknames. They were the vocabulary of a private world that predated Diana by years, a shorthand that only develops between two people who've spent enormous amounts of unguarded time together, who've built something enclosed and intimate, and who have no intention of leaving it. Fred and Glattis. Remember those names. Diana was 19 years old when the engagement was announced on 24th February 1981. She'd met Charles roughly a dozen times. She'd been vetted, not by Charles, but by the institution, as suitable. Aristocratic bloodline through the Spencer family, no previous relationships, young enough to be molded. She moved into Clarence's house, then into rooms at Buckingham Palace, and during those strange, displaced weeks between private person and public property, she started feeling the edges of something no one wanted her to touch. She befriended Michael Colborne, Charles's personal secretary, a decent, practical man who managed the daily business of the prince's private life. Diana took to visiting his office, partly because she genuinely liked him, partly because she'd worked out that his office was the nerve center through which Charles's personal affairs, in every sense, were conducted. She started asking Colborne questions about Camilla. Colborne, by his own later accounts, was trapped. Loyal to Charles, increasingly sympathetic to Diana, unable to tell her the truth, unable to stop her from finding it. The wedding was set for 29th of July, 1981. What Diana found, she found roughly 2 weeks before that date, mid-July, when London was already saturated with commemorative merchandise and the event had become an unstoppable national spectacle. The location? Michael Colborne's office, within the working quarters of the Prince of Wales's household. Diana walked in. She noticed a package. She wanted to see what was inside. Colborne objected, not casually, but urgently. He understood what was in that box. He understood what it would do. Diana opened it anyway. Inside was a gold chain bracelet with a blue enamel disc, and engraved on that disc, 2 letters, G and F, Glattis and Fred, a gift from Prince Charles to Camilla Parker-Bowles, custom made, ready to be delivered, commissioned, designed, ordered, and wrapped in the weeks before his wedding to another woman, while his fiancée was being fitted for her dress in the next room. Diana knew what those letters meant. She'd overheard enough by then. Fragments of conversation, half-whispered references, the shorthand of a relationship she had sensed but never confirmed. The G and the F weren't mysterious to her. They were confirmation. Not that Charles had once been involved with Camilla, that he still was. Right now. In the same weeks Diana was learning to curtsy for the Queen, Charles was having intimate jewelry engraved with pet names for his lover. In her recorded testimony, spoken alone into a tape recorder in 1991 for the journalist Andrew Morton, Diana described what it did to her with that single, structural word. Devastated. Not hurt, not upset. Devastated. A word that means the destruction of something that stood. And what it tells you is that Diana, up until that moment, had still been holding on. She'd suspected, she'd worried, she'd asked questions no one would answer, but she'd still believed, or at least hoped, that the marriage was real, that Charles had chosen her, that whatever had existed with Camilla was finished. The bracelet ended that. In one object, in one afternoon, in one office, the entire foundation of her future cracked apart, and she could see what was underneath. There was no love story. There was a casting decision and a ceremony. And the man she was about to marry was still writing love letters in gold and enamel to someone else. Here is where the story pivots from infidelity to something much darker. Because Diana tried to do the rational thing. She tried to stop. After finding the bracelet, she went to her sisters, Lady Sarah McCorquodale and Lady Jane Fellows. She told them what she'd found. She told them she wanted to call off the wedding. She was in genuine anguish, asking the people closest to her in the world for permission to escape. She didn't get it. Too late, Dooch. Your face is already on the tea towels. Dooch was Diana's family nickname, short for Duchess, a childhood moniker, ironic in a way nobody intended at the time. And the tea towels were real. By mid-July 1981, merchandise bearing Diana's image had flooded every shop window in the kingdom. The guest list included heads of state from across the globe. Television coverage was being coordinated in over 70 countries. An estimated 750 million people were preparing to watch. Mugs, plates, souvenir programs, flags, her face on all of it. To cancel was to detonate a bomb at the center of British public life. And Diana was 19, and her own sisters were telling her the thing was too big to stop, that it didn't matter what she'd found, that the performance would proceed. Think about what that means. She didn't walk into her marriage blind. She walked in seen. She had the evidence in her hands. She'd tried to act on it. And she'd been told, not by the palace, not by courtiers, not by the Queen, but by her own family, in the gentlest and most devastating terms possible, that her knowledge didn't matter. She was no longer a woman making a choice. She was a product being delivered. On 29th July 1981, Lady Diana Spencer walked the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral in a dress with a 25-foot train, her waist measuring 23 inches. That number would later be understood not as couture detail, but as symptom. Diana's bulimia had begun during the engagement period, inextricably connected, she said on the tapes, to the emotional destruction of the bracelet discovery and everything that followed. Her body was processing what her circumstances wouldn't allow her to speak. The designers had to take the dress in repeatedly during the final fittings. They assumed pre-wedding nerves. It wasn't nerves. It was knowledge, consuming her from the inside. She spoke her vows. She smiled for the cameras. She waved from the balcony of Buckingham Palace. She kissed her husband in front of the world. She did all of this, knowing about the bracelet, knowing about Glattis and Fred, knowing that a gold chain with a blue enamel disc was waiting to be delivered to the woman Charles actually loved. 3 days later, Charles and Diana boarded the royal yacht Britannia for a honeymoon cruise from Gibraltar toward Egypt. And the confirmations came fast. Diana spotted gold cufflinks on Charles's wrists, 2 intertwined C's, one for Charles, one for Camilla. She described them on the Morton tapes with lethal precision. "Like the Chanel C's," she said, then added, and this is pure Diana, the dark wit cutting through the grief, "Got it in one." He was wearing another woman's gift on his body, on their honeymoon. Then photographs of Camilla fell from Charles's personal diary, not hidden in deep storage, in his planner, the record of his daily life. Camilla was in everything. The bracelet had told her the truth. The cufflinks and the photographs simply underlined it, twice, in ink that wouldn't wash out. But here's the thing nobody talks about. The bracelet didn't just reveal an affair. It revealed the nature of the affair, and that distinction changes everything. Charles and Camilla first became involved in the early 1970s. They met around 1970 or 1971. The connection was immediate. But Charles left for naval duty, and during his absence, Camilla married Andrew Parker-Bowles in July 1973. The official narrative, the one Charles's allies promoted for decades, held that the romance ended there. Youthful chapter closed. The chapter never closed. Charles and Camilla remained in close contact throughout the 1970s. Their relationship had resumed its full dimension well before Diana appeared on the scene. By the time Charles began courting Diana in 1980, Camilla was still deeply embedded in his life, and accounts from multiple biographers, including Tina Brown in The Diana Chronicles and Sally Bedell Smith, indicate the relationship continued through the engagement itself. Not fading, active. Commissioning personalized jewelry, active. So the bracelet wasn't evidence of a relapse. It was evidence of continuity. It was a man maintaining his primary relationship while publicly preparing to enter a marriage the institution required of him. And if it was current, if Charles was having jewelry made for Camilla at the same time Diana was learning protocol, then the marriage was not what it appeared. It had never been what it appeared. Diana wasn't a partner. She was a casting choice. Young, aristocratic, unattached, no romantic history that could embarrass the crown. Her purpose was to provide heirs and project the image of a romantic monarchy. The love story was set dressing. Fred and Glattis were the real couple. Charles and Diana were the production. Everything we know about this moment with forensic specificity, the office, the package, the letters, the word devastated, comes from one source. And understanding that source matters, because this isn't gossip. This is testimony. In 1991, Diana agreed to cooperate secretly with the journalist Andrew Morton on a book about her life. The arrangement was engineered for deniability. An intermediary, Dr. James Colthurst, an old friend of Diana's, served as courier. Morton would prepare questions and send them through Colthurst. Diana would record her answers alone, speaking into a tape recorder in private, no interviewer present, then pass the tapes back through the same channel. The system meant Diana could truthfully claim she'd never met with Morton, never spoken to him directly. It was designed to protect her from the palace. Diana, Her True Story, was published in June 1992, and it detonated. The palace denied Diana's involvement. She maintained her distance publicly. It was only after her death that Morton revealed the full extent of her participation and published the transcripts themselves in the 1997 edition, subtitled In Her Own Words. The tapes are extraordinary. Without an interviewer's presence, without the performative pressure of a camera, Diana simply talks. The result is closer to testimony under oath than to any interview she ever gave publicly. By turns sardonic, wounded, precise, and breathtakingly direct. When she describes the bracelet, she doesn't speak in generalities. She names Colborne. She names the office. She describes the object. She identifies the initials. She recounts Colborne's objections and her insistence on opening the package. This isn't a woman recounting old gossip. This is a woman describing the moment a foundation gave way. And critically, in her telling, the bracelet wasn't one incident among many. It was the incident. The first domino. The discovery that told her everything, after which the cufflinks, the photographs, the years of unhappiness, and the eventual public disintegration were merely the elaboration of what she'd already understood from one afternoon in Michael Colborne's office. The bracelet wasn't a chapter in the story. It was the whole story. Everything else was epilogue. There's a reason every other Diana documentary buries this moment. It's not that they don't know about it. It's that what comes later is louder. The Squidgygate tapes, the Camilla Gate recording, the Panorama interview, the divorce. All of it, louder, messier, more spectacular. The bracelet is quiet. It sits in mid-July 1981, 2 weeks before the biggest wedding of the 20th century, in a secretary's office, in a box that was never meant to be opened by the woman who opened it. No cameras, no leaked phone calls, no BBC journalists, just a 19-year-old woman, a piece of jewelry, and 2 letters that told her everything. But the quiet is the point. Every scandal that followed, every headline, every leak, every public confrontation was a consequence of this. This was the fracture. Everything else was the building falling down. And by the time the world started paying attention, the collapse was already years old. They were watching demolition and calling it news. The damage had been done in a room no one was filming, on an afternoon no one recorded, with an object no one was supposed to see. After the bracelet, Diana understood something that would define the rest of her years inside the monarchy. She was performing a marriage, not living one. Her descriptions of the wedding day on the Morton tapes carry the quality of someone narrating their own entrapment from a slight, surreal distance. She walked up that aisle knowing what she knew. The ceremony wasn't sacred to her. It was a spectacle she was passing through. The smile was a mask. The vows were lines. The entire event, the cathedral, the dress, the carriage procession, the 750 million viewers, was, from Diana's perspective, a production she'd been unable to stop and was now compelled to complete. She described performing happiness, smiling for cameras while crying in private, attending official engagements as a radiant princess, while knowing her husband was telephoning Camilla from Highgrove, their country residence in Gloucestershire. The public adored her. Crowds came out in their thousands. They reached for her, not for him. Diana was brilliant at the role, magnetic, warm, instinctively attuned to the emotional frequency that public life demanded. But her brilliance was the brilliance of performance, and she'd known that since July 1981, since a bracelet in a box in an office, since 2 letters on a blue enamel disc. The selection criteria for Charles's bride had been openly discussed in the press. Suitable birth, youth, no past. Diana met every requirement. She was the daughter of the 8th Earl Spencer. She was 19. She was, by every institutional measure, perfect for the role. But suitability isn't love. The bracelet proved Charles knew the difference, because he had love. It just wasn't with Diana. And that, really, is the cruelest part. Not that he didn't love her, but that he was perfectly capable of love. He proved it, for someone else, for decades. He just never directed it at the woman the world believed he'd chosen. A gold chain bracelet, a blue enamel disc, 2 letters, G and F. That's all it took. Not years of tabloid warfare, not secretly recorded phone calls, not a television interview watched by millions of people. a bracelet found in an office 2 weeks before a wedding by a teenager who wasn't supposed to open the box. Diana carried that knowledge up the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral. She carried it onto the royal yacht Britannia. She carried it through the births of her sons, the tours, the charity galas, the magazine covers, and a slow, spectacular unraveling that the entire world would eventually watch, without ever understanding that the unraveling had begun before the marriage did. Every other documentary gives you the explosion. This is the match. One object, one afternoon, one woman who opened a box she wasn't supposed to touch and saw, in 2 engraved letters, the entire architecture of a lie. That was the moment Diana knew. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more like it.